and welcome to Among the Jungle podcast. I'm botanist and host, Shy Kinda, and I'd love for you to join me as I interview the incredible plant people of Instagram to create an audio vault of inspiring botanical knowledge while harnessing a deeper connection with us in our natural world. If you're ready, it's time to inspire your wild. Welcome, jungle dwellers, to episode 3 of Among the Jungle podcast. I'm so excited to explore today's topic with you all because this episode is about one super specialized aspect of the horticultural arts, bonsai. If you listened to episode 1, you know that I spent the last couple of years on a tiny island in South Florida eating mangoes, exploring botanical gardens, and working for the most incredible bonsai nursery and bonsai artist, Eric Weigert of Weigert's Bonsai in North Fort Myers. This is where I met the inspiring Mike Lane. He's one of the main instructors at the nursery, and honestly one of the most bonsai passionate people I met in my time working there. And it's because of that incredible passion, I felt he was the perfect guest to explore this miniature world of magnificent trees. And he did not disappoint. He delivers a full palette of practical tips, Zen wisdoms, and lessons in both history and culture. I hope you're ready to explore a whole new world because the 4 key things we're going to learn today are the art and discipline of bonsai, common misconceptions associated to bonsai, life lessons we can all learn from the trees, and how you can get started on your own bonsai tree today. So with that, let's welcome Mike Lane to the jungle. Welcome, and thank you so much for being here today, Mike.
And thanks for having me.
I'd love to start out by learning a little bit more about your plant journey and perhaps your first significant memory of plants.
Well, my plant journey probably didn't start as most would. I actually, when I was younger, the first plant I ever grew was a pot plant. And what I actually found that was unique was that I didn't fall in love with growing pot necessarily. I fell in love with the care that it took to kind of progress that plant and the routine that I had to go through daily. And shortly thereafter, I kind of quit doing that, and there was kind of a void in my life. And so it was several years later where, I tried to fill it in with orchids and carnivorous plants. But it wasn't until I found bonsai that I really kind of filled that hole and found the routine again and found something that really resonated with me.
And so how did you get into bonsai specifically?
Well, when I was younger, I've always kind of been intrigued by Japan. I guess when I was younger, it was kind of always viewed as a place where outcasts kind of could fit in. And it was a place that was very, very bizarre and weird and had a very unique culture when I was younger, looking at it from here. And so I originally really started taking a like to the culture and fell in love with some of their martial arts. Some of the older ones, like what they call Budo. And that's basically the practicing of the old samurai code and the samurai martial arts. And that was something that I pursued for about 5 years. And there was a point where an injury kind of prevented me from pursuing that further. And that kind of coincided with when I was starting to discover plants. And there was somebody who was kind enough to gift me a bonsai, and that kind of linked the two together. And I realized that was kind of the perfect harmony between my two desires. And it allowed me kind of to keep exploring that culture. And so the second that I found bonsai, I kind of just knew that was what I needed to be doing.
And at what point did you come into contact with Eric and Weigert's Bonsai?
Well, actually, Eric has been there at the beginning of my entire bonsai journey, so I'm very, very fortunate. I was given a bonsai as a gift, and the first thing I did was kind of just start researching as much as I could about bonsai in the area, because I knew I knew that the bonsai that I was given, I knew not that it wasn't legit, but I just knew that there was more. And so I started looking around and, to my surprise, found a bonsai nursery with magnificent trees that was just in North Fort Myers. So I decided that on my birthday, I would go down there and buy myself a tree. And so that was the first time I met Eric, and it was the first time I had ever really seen real bonsai. And it was also the first day that I really knew what I wanted to do with my life. So I met him, and at first he was kind of a little unreceptive to having an apprentice, and rightfully so. Eric's one of those guys that kind of wants you to prove to him or prove to yourself rather that this is something you really want. And so I basically took every class I could out there and tried to just be around him as much as I could and just try to make myself useful where I could. And it wasn't long until he did invite me to come out and start helping him out in the nursery more and more. And it's been almost 11 years now that we've been doing that. And, he's really been just a huge impact on both my bonsai and my life as a whole.
I can definitely relate to that sentiment because the Weigerts have had a huge impact on my life as well. So what things have expanded for you since taking on bonsai?
Oh, well, one of the things that I was always fascinated with was Eric's ability to travel. He was always traveling with bonsai. And so that was always one of my goals, was to try and get big enough to where I was really starting to travel around and spread my love for bonsai, and hopefully maybe make a little bit of money as well. But it's really been in the last few years that it's really been taken off, and I have gotten a lot of requests to do out-of-state work. And so it's been very interesting and rewarding in that regards. And I hope to just continue on until I'm starting to travel internationally and spreading my love for that. So,
well, cheers to spreading the plant love. So you do some instructing at Weigerts, and you do private bonsai lessons as well. So what things are you doing when you're traveling? Teaching workshops or?
So usually it's a lot of times they bring me in for a lecture and then a workshop, but I've actually done everything from heading up state shows or being guest speakers at state shows and working with programs and demonstrations and lectures, that sort of thing. So oftentimes we'll also have what's called a workshop, where we get a bunch of individuals who have bought a certain species of tree that we're promoting, and then we basically do a program and talk to them about how to both care and style that species of tree. So that's very common too, to be brought out to do something like that.
Very diverse. That's awesome. So let's dig a little bit more into bonsai. Is that something that originates in Japan?
Well, bonsai, as it's known today, does originate in Japan. The rules and the code that goes with it, the formula, is definitely rooted in Japan. But the actual idea behind it goes way back, further back to China, and it was imported to Japan. So it's not distinctly a Japanese art, but I tend to prefer to practice it that way. Like I said, the culture that I fell in love with was the older Japanese culture, their religion, like Zen and Shintoism. And so that tends to be where I gravitate.
It really is such an inspiring culture. Can you tell us what bonsai actually is?
Well, in its simplest meaning, the word bonsai just means tree in a tray. But realistically, I think to understand what a bonsai is, you have to kind of understand why people grew them to begin with. And so originally why the Japanese became so fascinated with it was that their religion at the time, Zen Buddhism and also Shintoism, dictates a closeness with nature, which was kind of in direct contrast to the urbanization of Japan at the time, which was forcing people further and further away from the mountains, further and further away from the forests. And so these people became fascinated with bringing trees from the mountains to their home, or collecting trees on their travels and bringing them home. And they felt that was bringing the nature to their house. So realistically, bonsai is about conveniently enjoying nature. To me, that's what I would feel the most accurate description is.
Wow, I absolutely love that description, and I've never heard that before. So what are the actual components, the physical components, to classify something nowadays as a bonsai tree?
Well, I mean, a lot of people like to say that it's the illusion of a large tree in miniature, but realistically, if you really break it down, it is a physiologically miniature tree that is always paired with a pot as a composition. So a true bonsai isn't just the tree. A true bonsai is not complete until it is in perfect harmony with its container. But typically we do try to, in bonsai, not just create an illusion of a larger tree these days, but we do actually kind of break down the physiology and the anatomy of the tree and try to replicate that to its smallest detail.
So you're not only putting a small tree into a tray or bonsai pot, but you're also training that tree to grow in such a way that, let's say, for example, its leaves, things on it are starting to actually dwarf and get smaller themselves.
Exactly. So a plant doesn't understand scale, and it doesn't understand that it's any smaller than it would be if it was a larger tree, provided that the physiology is the same. So a mature tree is a mature tree if it's 6 inches tall or if it's 50 feet tall. And so bonsai allows us to create mature old trees and enjoy them in the convenience of our home. So that's kind of one of the joys of it, is it's not just creating a plant and enjoying nature. It's bringing these very revered, these very old and respected specimens home so that you can enjoy and reflect on them. So, it does have a very heavy air of Zen to it in the way it's practiced.
That inspires me to ask, is bonsai meant to be appreciated indoors?
No, so that's actually a great question, and a question that confuses many, many, many people. So again, understanding why people think that bonsai grows indoors, people have to understand where that image comes from. And so in Japan, traditionally, each house is built around a tokonoma, or like an enclave at the entrance of the home. And that enclave is for displaying seasonal art when you're having guests or at special occasions. And so at times during special occasions or during changes of season, people will go out to their garden and select their finest bonsai for the season, or one that's displaying the season that they're trying to convey, and they'll put together a composition in the tokonoma. It's not always bonsai. It can sometimes be suiseki or viewing stones. It can be ikebana or flower arrangements. It can be calligraphy. But it's usually, or can be, and is often a bonsai composition with a tree, an accent, and then a scroll with a sumi or calligraphy on it. And that's to welcome guests into your home. And so people see this image of bonsai being displayed indoors, and they get the idea that that's where they live full time. And it's not true. The tree stays in the tokonoma for maybe a week, and then it's put back outside, and if need be, another tree brought in to take its place and a new composition made.
And is this similar to the way that you show bonsai at a national competition, let's say?
Yes, correct. So the art of displaying in a tokonoma is essentially very similar, if not the same, to displaying at a display or a national show. It's basically, that's built around the art and an idea of displaying in a tokonoma. So those very same principles, they convey very well to the modern day show.
Can you explain to us the size of bonsai that you specialize in and what Shohin means?
So Shohin is something that I've kind of really taken a liking to, and what I've dedicated my bonsai career to, if you can call it that. Shohin is basically just referring to one of the smallest subsets of bonsai, where trees are at most 8 inches tall from the bottom to the top, and at smallest 4 inches tall. So that puts us into that Shohin category, which right underneath that would be Mame, which is trees under 4 inches, and above that would be Kifu, which are trees that are above 8 inches. So Shohin is basically one of those smaller classes, And it's highly valued basically because you can get a high quality tree for a little bit less money that has every bit the quality of a larger tree. And you can also develop vast collections with a lot of variety and also develop quite an interesting pot collection. So Shohin trees are typically the trees where you'll see the most exquisite or most artistic pots, basically just because the size keeps that kind of ornateness cost prohibitive.
So how do you start a smaller tree? Do you start it from seed or do you start with a larger specimen first?
Well, bonsai, any bonsai can be started in a variety of different ways, from collecting old trees to growing things from seed. Some of the purists would argue that true Shohin are started from seed or small cutting and then grown up through the mame and grown through pot culture their entire life. So they're basically start out as seedlings that are then grown until they reach nice mame, and then those mame are kept very nice for years and years and years until they get too big and they become Shohin. So that's the kind of old purist mentality of it. Nowadays, there's kind of quicker ways to do it with cuttings and air layers, basically taking older material and progressing it faster. So a lot of times we'll basically take a vegetative piece, a cutting off of one tree that's maybe pinky sized, and that'll at least give us a good year or two head start to start growing a Shohin, or take an air layer that might be 4 to 5 years old that gives us a nice 2-inch trunk to start off of. So there's several ways to kind of build a Shohin. Also in the United States, it's very, very common to do what's called the trunk chop, where you basically take old material or larger material and cut it in half and regrow the taper. It's not my favorite method of growing Shohin, but it has produced some very fine trees in the past and continues to today.
Now you're in South Florida, so what kind of trees are you growing down there that are really thriving for you?
So me personally, we all kind of have our favorites, but me personally, I really favor tropical-wise. I like the Premna microphylla, which kind of stems from Indonesia, Philippines, Taiwan. I also really, really like the sea hibiscus. I also really like the water jasmine, which are also all from very similar areas. They're all from the Indo-Pacific. And they're trees that respond very, very well to our climate and grow very, very quickly. So developing trunks or trees, it's very, very easy to both propagate and develop these trees quickly while also maintaining the quality. As far as Florida natives, the number one for me and the one that I tend to really gravitate towards is our buttonwood. Buttonwood is one of the 4 trees of the Florida mangle, or our mangrove ecosystem. And so that's something that growing up, it's always felt like a big part of Florida for me. So those are definitely my favorite native.
And those are super twisty and produce a lot of deadwood and stuff as well, correct?
So in bonsai, especially on collected trees like buttonwoods or things that you're looking for that gnarled trunk, we do want to find material that has struggled to survive, that material that hasn't given up. So something that has maybe been knocked over by a hurricane and stripped on one side of all of its branches, and then it grows back up for 2 to 3 years only to be knocked back over. You do that for about 30 years and you develop a trunk that has many, many turns, many twists, and a lot of driftwood and deadwood to it, and just a lot of character and age to the trunk. And that's really the material that, even going back to classical bonsai in Japan, that was the material that was revered the most. That was the material that, you'd come across these trees and you would want to bring that home and treat it like a respected friend, or, like anything else that you hold in high reverence. So buttonwoods are one of the premier materials in Florida that grow in that growth habit. And so, yes, they do develop some very, very interesting and cool trunks.
And that is known as collecting or yamadori. Is that correct?
So in Japan, it's known as yamadori. Over here in the United States or in the West, we just refer to it as collected material. And what that basically means is material that nature has formed for us. So material that has gone through usually has gone through a lot of issues, has basically had a lot of adversity in its life, and has persevered through it to make these beautiful trunks that continue to fight. And so on a design like that on Yamadori, the whole idea is to convey that balance between life and death, a tree that's just hanging in there.
That's beautiful. And so the pot would also go into the final design of that. So
in bonsai, the pot plays a 50% role in the final composition. It's supposed to be in harmony with the plant and not supposed to be just showcasing two artists. So commonly now, it's very common to see people get very flashy with their pots and show very nice trees with very nice masterpiece pots, but they aren't necessarily in harmony. True Japanese bonsai, brings the pot and the tree into a subtle harmony where they play off of each other, but not one pulls more from the eye than the other. So trees like these junipers, these trees with this big contrast between life and death, you don't want to pull away from that. So typically with trees like that, they're potted in subdued, old, unglazed containers that are more sought after for their form rather than their glaze.
And they're taking both the masculine and feminine energies into consideration when they're making these pairings, aren't they?
Yeah, so everything in bonsai is viewed as either a masculine trait or a feminine trait. So trees that have a lot of deadwood, that have very jagged, hard angles would be considered masculine. Dark colors, dark foliage, that's masculine. Whereas trees that are softer, more curved, and that flower brilliantly or have a lot of color to them are typically seen as feminine. Whereas the flip side is the same with the pots, is that typically the masculine pots are seen as the subdued, hard-edged square or rectangle pots that are unglazed, whereas the feminine pots would be considered the ovals, the rounds, and the brilliant colors, the glazes. So one more just thought on that is that both of those can be used interchangeably as far as having a masculine pot with feminine features or a feminine pot with masculine features.
So it's not necessarily one way or the other.
Correct. So you can find unglazed oval pots. So the oval would be a feminine shape, whereas the unglazed is considered a masculine quality. So you can kind of mix. You could have rectangle glazed pots that, the shape is masculine, but the glaze is obviously feminine. So nowadays there's also a lot of trees that are used in bonsai that kind of blur that line between masculine and feminine. We have trees. There's one called the Desmodium that has a lot of these hard angles and deadwood, but then blossoms with beautiful purple flowers all over it. So it's a tricky tree to pot up.
Okay, so there are some rules, but part of it is open to the artist.
It is. Getting down to the real argument, people will argue all the time about whether bonsai is an art or a discipline. And I think that's going to largely depend on the person practicing it. And I think if you look at bonsai as an art, then it is very much subjective. And so just because one person enjoys seeing a tree one way doesn't mean that another person will enjoy it the same. So if you do look at it as an art, I do think that especially with the pots, you do have a lot of freedom to choose. Some of the kind of older guys, or not even the older guys, but some of the old school guys, I should say, don't look at it so much as an art and look at bonsai as a discipline, especially when you're first starting out. So just like a martial art or anything like that, you wouldn't go into a MMA class and say, well, I want to do, this martial art my way. You would first learn their way until you're good enough to make the changes that you feel it needs. So that's how most Japanese arts are approached, is you're supposed to watch and learn until you can do it as good as the guy before you. And then you add your final little graces to it for the next guy. Wow,
that's really beautiful. I love that concept of forward thinking. and of intending to pass that tree down.
Yeah, exactly. And so some people find it a little harsh or a little rigid, and they feel that, the Japanese don't look at bonsai like an art. And but they do. They just want you to go through the discipline first. They want you to kind of learn a little bit about aesthetics, learn how to build trees like that. And then once you're kind of to their level, then you can make the changes that, you are now the master. So
now, what are some aspects to building a tree? What are some of these mechanisms that we use to train our trees?
Well, some of the things we use are like metal wire to wrap the branches with, and we use the metal wire essentially to bring the branches down and shape them to the aesthetic that we desire. But also, all you really need to build a bonsai effectively is just a pair of scissors and just good technique. The more I do this, the longer I do this, especially with Shohin trees, I realize how important the scissors are. Your number one tools that you have in bonsai are to grow branches big and then to divide branches. Those are essentially your two projects that you're working with, your two tools. You're growing branches for size and thickness, and then you're cutting them for division. So the way we build trees is just step by step, growing one up to be the trunk line, one to be a branch, cutting the branch to divide it, and letting the trunk line grow to thicken it until it's ready to be cut, and then we divide that too. So the longer I do this, the more I just see that it can be very, very simple and can be not very involved, or you can take it to kind of that extreme level of hyper refinement.
But it's important to remember that the whole thing is a journey, not a destination.
Well, yeah, and bonsai's the perfect teacher for that, because if you're a person who's looking for a destination, bonsai's going to leave you horribly disappointed, because any of the successes you get in bonsai are only short-lived. They're short windows in time, and then you have to get back to work. You can't rest on your laurels. Trees only stay perfect for so long, and then they have to evolve, and they need to be pruned and reworked. Trees that are left unattended in their perfect state will tend to shade out the inner structure, and branches on the inside of the tree will start to die. So it's never over. There's never a point where, not like another art where you paint a picture, you hang it on the wall, and you're done. It's an art that demands your attention every day. So it is very different.
I've even seen you take some of your more refined trees back a few stages to start developing and working on certain areas.
Yeah, so it goes back to some of the old baseball player guys will say that, if you want to relearn how to swing, you got to break down your old swing. And that is very much true with bonsai and with trees that were possibly built on flaws or were built on issues that might decrease the longevity of the design. Sometimes you have to take a step backwards before you can take a step forwards. So oftentimes trees that haven't been maintained well or have just been kind of lightly maintained for just ideal aesthetic. Basically, if people want to try to just freeze frame their tree and keep it the same, that develops a lot of issues that then bigger fixes are needed. So what might get you by for a few years, just pruning the tree into a triangle, eventually, in order to fix the real problems, you'll have to possibly cut off, most of what you've grown.
But you can make huge leaps by doing that.
Absolutely. No, one thing that I've learned is, these trees do keep growing. And so setting them back to an appropriate spot and building them correctly actually will end up saving you more time than just continually fixing flaws.
That's very smart and very wise advice in life in general.
Yeah, definitely.
So for the people who are all over the world, what are some good bonsai trees that they can grow indoors?
Sure. There are some trees. Now, it's important to know, though, that, growing something indoors and having something thrive indoors is kind of two different things. So I'll say that there are some trees that can develop and be nice bonsai, such as dwarf jades. Those are one of my favorite indoor ones. All they really need is to be close to a bright window, and they should develop pretty nicely. but they'll never develop as nicely as a tree in full sun. The exception to that rule is if you invest in any kind of lighting system. I've seen some of the best bonsai in the world grown with indoor lighting systems, some of the best tropicals even that have been grown that way. And so it's kind of just depends on the effort of the grower. But for easy trees, a couple of nice, really easy ones where you don't have to invest a lot, a dwarf jade, a schefflera, and a lot of the ficus will do good indoors.
A highlight scenario is key for reducing leaf size, correct?
Yeah, so trees are just programmed very efficiently in the way that they process energy. So a tree that's put outside into full sun typically will develop smaller leaves with a shiny reflective coating on it, a wax coating. So you'll see these leaves being very shiny. And what that is that's a small layer to reflect some of the light so that the leaves don't absorb as much heat. Also, same thing with the leaf size decreasing. So as the leaf size decreases, it's actually absorbing less heat. It's a smaller surface area. So those are two benefits that we'll see on trees grown in full sun. Trees that are grown in the shade will have the opposite effect. The leaf wants more light, so it'll get larger and increase its surface area, and the shine, the reflectant wax coating actually disappears, and you'll see it take on more of a matte finish, a finish that's more conducive to absorbing light. So they will show physiological differences between shade or low light, rather, and full sun.
What kind of lighting situation are you growing your trees in at home?
Well, I grow my trees outside on benches, so nothing showy. I'm a pretty utilitarian guy. I like to grow things kind of in rows on just workbenches that are kind of fashioned over the benches that they use in Japan. And I keep small trees in a probably 50% of the day full sun. So they'll get full sun in the morning, in the evening, but a little bit of a break during the hottest part of the day. And then my bigger trees, or trees that really like the full sun, junipers, pines, things like that, are basically put out in as much sun as I can give them. And I give them no kind of respite from the heat or anything like that.
Now, junipers, would that be something that you would suggest people grow indoors? I see those for sale a lot as bonsai.
No, so a juniper, especially indoor juniper, is almost guaranteed death sentence. I don't even think many people have grown junipers to much success, even with artificial lights. That is a tree that really does need full sun. So juniper on the TV stand, like what we see in the movies and stuff, it's not realistic, and it won't last long term. Junipers are one of those trees that they get a bad rap, and people kind of talk about them as though they're very difficult. But really, it's just a different physiology. It's a different horticulture, and once you kind of understand that, it takes away a lot of the fear. One of the number one issues people have with the junipers that they buy in stores is that these trees are in nursery soil, like a dark organic based soil that holds a lot of water. And then to kind of make that worse, they have a layer of rocks usually glued on top, not allowing any kind of gas exchange or anything like that. And junipers being a tree that A, like full sun, and B, don't like to be wet all the time, it's just kind of a definite death sentence for those trees, unfortunately.
Now, what kind of soil medium do you use in your bonsai trees?
Well, it opens up a can of worms to really get into the soil medium. But for me, I like to use what we use at the nursery, and it's basically just an aggregate mix. It's lava, expanded shale, and a little bit of pine bark. And I use that for the trees that really like a coarse mix. There's another amendment that I'll kind of add in for smaller trees. It's called akadama, and that's a very famous soil amendment from Japan. And so I'll use that just on trees that need a little bit more water retention. So I do switch the soils that I'll use for different trees depending on their likes and dislikes. But it's usually an aggregate soil with a rather large particle size.
And what does that soil allow to happen subsurface?
Well, number one is proper drainage. Is bonsai is one of those things that we are reducing the foliage. We're pruning the tree and shaping the tree quite often. And so what bonsai soil really allows us to do is not have to overthink the watering so much. Basically, it works best for junipers. This is the best example of it. Is junipers, basically, when we work on them, we lose at least 30% of the foliage mass, which means that tree is now going to use 30% less water than it was before. Here in Florida, if you're in nursery soil, and which all of these beginners, they bring their trees in and they're still in that dark organic soil. And the first thing they want to do, because it looks the coolest and it's the most fun, is they want to style the tree and make it look like a bonsai. So we take about 30% of the foliage off, and let's say this is in May. So now we have a tree that's using 30% less water in a really wet mix, and we're about to go into rainy season in Florida where you're going to get 6 inches of water, or 6 inches of rain. So what can happen is with the bonsai mix, all that excess rain is just falling out the bottom. So regardless of what you did to the top, you can only hold so much moisture in that pot. The organic mix will hold 10 times as much water in the pot. And that's just the first benefit, is that well-draining soil that allows us to kind of get away with our work. The other benefits to aggregate soil are allowing better root division, better gas exchange, and less issue having fungus growths that we don't want. So it has a lot of different benefits.
And do you think this aggregate soil could be used on other plants as well, not just bonsai?
Yeah, I do. And I think it is. I think anything that's been grown hydroponically is a very similar process, using kind of an aggregate to flush nutrients and water through the roots without overwatering them. So it is used oftentimes for other plants, and in some cases it can really improve kind of fruiting, flowering, the general horticulture of the plant. It's not a cure-all, but it has been used to success with most plants.
Now, I'm assuming with a soil like that, there's going to be less natural nutrient available. So what kind of nutrients or supplements, amendments do you add to help your plants get nutrient?
The aggregate soil is usually, most people's mixes are going to be completely devoid of organics. So if you go to Japan, most of the mixes they're going to use have zero organics. So it's always up to the grower of a bonsai to feed the plant. The plant will get no nutrients anywhere else. So usually for trees that I'm trying to grow quickly, I use a very high in nitrogen fertilizer, looking for NPK. That's nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus. So those are the three most vital nutrients that the plant needs, as well as some other micronutrients, iron, and so on. So after a while, I'll start to actually fertilize with organics as the tree starts to mature and as I need to slow the tree down and start to grow finer details. And that also tends to take care of all the micronutrients as well. And I'll use everything from compost to worm castings, fish emulsion, liquid kelp, all sorts of organics to kind of achieve the desired effect. And so understanding the NPK system will kind of help us understand how to feed it and when.
And with that high nitrogen fertilizer, you're really trying to achieve good leaf growth.
Yeah, so the nitrogen, the way I like to break up bonsai and the way a lot of the guys who have trained in Japan do it is breaking bonsai into 3 different parts. So whenever we're given a new tree, we first start the tree on its health regimen. If you give me a tree as a gift, the first thing I do, because I know nothing about the tree, is to get it healthy. Even if it's doing okay, I look to get it well fed and get it in the appropriate soil. And then the next thing is going to be development. I want to develop my vision. And so a lot of the big growth that I need to achieve that with a very strong nitrogen fertilizer that's going to push very, very strong leggy growth. And that'll allow me to build a tree quickly. And finally, I take the tree to a refinement phase. So once the tree has grown the bulk of the trunk, the bulk of the work that I need done, I want to slow it down and I want to start focusing in on the finer details, the outer shell. So I basically start a tree on health. As soon as I can get it healthy and ready for development, I move it to development. And then once I get ready from development, I switch from synthetic fertilizer to organics and really start to slow everything down.
Now, in the spirit of talking about more refined trees, would you mind telling us what the most valuable tree in your collection currently is?
It's a newer tree. It's a European olive, and it's probably got a worth of about $1,500.
Wow, that's incredible. Now, again, if you don't mind, what is your most valuable bonsai pot? Because I know that this is also its own art form, and maybe even what is your favorite bonsai pot artist currently? Because I know that changes.
Oh, it does change. My favorite bonsai, well, my most expensive bonsai pot that I currently have is a $450 Koyo, I believe. It's a small pot. It's maybe 4 inches wide. And so it's just a Shohin pot. And it's something that I acquired this year. And it's the most expensive Shohin pot or even pot I've bought so far. But it's important to know that, the pots do go up in value tremendously. It's not unheard of for people to spend a couple thousand on an old antique pot. So $400 is kind of mid-road. My favorite potters currently, I'd say in Japan, my favorite current potter is Koyo. He's just recently retired with his son Juko taking over the kiln. And everything that comes out of that kiln, I'm just always fascinated by the shapes, the glazes, the clay. I really just think that that's an artist that will go down as one of our greats of our time. As far as American potters, my favorite is a guy who goes by the name Roy Minerai, and he, I believe, is out of North Carolina, but he's basically just picked up the craft a couple years ago and started doing studying into classical Japanese glazes, and now is kind of churning out some of the best, most complex glazes that I've seen in North America by far. So definitely him. And there's another gentleman, Ken Toe, who's an American potter who's definitely making some Japanese grade stuff. So,
wow, are the Japanese known to have some of the most valuable bonsai pots?
Yeah, actually, interestingly enough, while the antique Japanese pots are very, very prized, the antique Chinese pots are what the highest end trees always go into, and those are the most revered pots. So the real antique Chinese pots, there's even an era that's commonly sought after called Nawaka Katari, I believe is how you pronounce it, and that's basically like 1800s Chinese pottery for bonsai. So those are big deal pots and fetch a hefty price, and are basically very, very valued in the Japanese culture to put your high-end trees in.
So this has to mean that you definitely have a pot or a plant with a story.
Oh, so many. I'd say almost every pot and every tree that I have has a story at this point. Yeah, so one of my favorite trees in my collection that I really like the story is a sea hibiscus that I collected with Eric when we were both much, much younger. And it was a tree that Eric actually collected while I sat in a canoe during a thunderstorm on the water, and it was the best sea hibiscus we've ever seen growing in the wild or anywhere in Florida, and kind of reminded us of the ones we'd seen in the books. And I let the tree go, and he sold it to another individual, and that tree disappeared for a long time. And a few years ago, I think 2 years ago, the tree came back to the nursery and was traded back. And I finally got my chance to, grab it and add it to the collection. And since then, I've taken that tree, a tree that previously I thought was very, very difficult to grow and very, very difficult to ramify and work with. And using some techniques and some things I've learned over the last few years have really pushed that to a new level. And so that tree just kind of, for me, represents a rebirth or a renewal And that's a very special tree for me.
Oh, that's lovely. And I would love to include a photo of that tree in the show notes too, so people can see how you've been working on it.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Now, if someone wanted to start a bonsai tree at home today, what are the basic components they would need to get started?
Well, honestly, all you need is first and foremost, a tree. In its simplest form, you just need probably a small $25 tree. Ideally, you want to find something that's got a little bit of width to it. So maybe a trunk that's ideally thumb thickness or bigger. And you start learning a little bit about bonsai aesthetics and what the goal is. But realistically, all you need is scissors, and maybe later on get yourself a plastic bonsai pot and start working on the tree. But first and foremost, all you need is just start pruning and start dividing things in the right way. So,
and when you're picking out a tree to maybe start your first bonsai,
oh yes,
what would you be looking for in the qualities of that tree?
Well, we could probably spend another 8 hours talking about that, but very, very quickly, just real quick, you want to look for something that has a lot of branches growing lower down on the trunk. So you don't want to find something that I call them lollipops. You don't want to have something that is just a stick, and at the top you kind of have a bunch of branches radiating from one spot. Bonsai is all about longevity. So finding a tree with good amounts of branches low down, where the branches are also staggered, so they're not right across from one another. You ideally want trees that have a branch that goes left, right, back, or the other way, right, left, back. But you want to have nice staggered branches, as many of those as you can get low down on the trunk. And just finding trees like that will save you a lot of development time.
It really sounds like bonsai and the trees have had a huge impact on your life.
Oh, absolutely. No, I was in finance before I met Eric and before I got into bonsai, and really thought my life was heading down that road, and that was going to be my career. And since being introduced to bonsai, I've just seen a complete different fork in my entire approach to life. So it's definitely changed me and kind of made me into who I am.
Honestly, nothing brings me more joy than knowing that plants have had that kind of impact on someone's life. Your story is just so inspiring, Mike. So tell us, if there's one thing that you could leave everyone with, one thing you would want everyone to know about bonsai, what would it be?
That bonsai is ever changing and is an art of impermanence. So bonsai is unique in that it is a partnership with both the plant and the person. And the art cannot thrive without one or the other. So to me, I just think that's a great symbol for life as a whole. And I think that as we grow bonsai trees, those trees, as corny as it sounds, and as much as it's been said, those trees also grow us.
Wow, I truly resonate with that message. So for those of us who could use a little more Zen and a little more bonsai in our lives, where can we continue to follow your work and journey?
Well, I have an Instagram. It's Mike Lane's Shohin Studio. And also you can find me on Facebook under Mike Lane. And I do try to post and keep up with my trees with the people who are following me, and try to give tips and help when I can on there.
And you also offer classes and one-on-one lessons and workshops as well, correct?
Yeah, I do. I have been traveling more and more throughout the different states as well, but I do offer all sorts of maintenance, private sessions, programs throughout the state of Florida. Offer basically any aspect of bonsai that people are willing to learn. So,
well, thank you so much again, Mike, for such enriching information about the Asian culture, and with sharing with us all the incredible lessons you've learned from the trees. And we all look forward to following your journey and seeing you down in Florida this December when we come and visit Weigert's Bonsai.
Thank you for keeping me in mind.
What an inspiring horticulture art form bonsai is. Am I right? So rich with its many inspiring messages, cultures, and teachings. And I will tell you, it was an absolute honor to work among these majestic trees and to learn from incredible plant people like Mike Lane, Jason Osborne, John Moya, and of course, Eric and Andrea Weigert during my treasured time working for Weigert's Bonsai Nursery. I plan to take you all on a virtual tour of their beautiful bonsai collection and nursery in December, and I promise you won't want to miss it. And of course, I have another challenge for you this week. I challenge you to take the time to tune into the energy of your plants. Do they have a masculine or feminine energy? Does the pot feel in harmony with the plant itself? Do you feel in harmony with the plant itself? What vibe or energy is it putting off? And what energy are you putting off towards your plants? What message do you feel your plants are trying to convey to you? Take lots of photos and tell me all about it by tagging me at Among the Jungle Podcast on Instagram. Also, don't forget to follow Mike Lane's Shohin Studio. And of course, subscribe to Among the Jungle Podcast on whatever podcast platform you are listening on. I hope this conversation inspired your wild, and I hope you can feel the deep-rooted passion Mike has for bonsai and the many things it's taught him. It's that very love that inspired me to invite him to speak with us today. Bonsai is such a fascinating and exotic niche of the plant kingdom, and it was an absolute honor viewing the world of bonsai through Mike's eyes. And until next time, my fellow jungle dwellers, love, light, and aloha. I am so grateful to the plants that bless this beautiful earth, and to you for choosing to nurture a wild place inside of your heart. I hope this episode inspired your wild, and I'd love to hear your feedback, suggestions for future guests, and other botanical notes at amongthejungle.com or amongthejungle on Instagram. It's been lovely exploring this exotic world with you today, and I look forward to where the journey takes us next week. Mahalo for tuning in, and stay wild.